Hello and welcome to Moment of Truth on Labour Social. I'm Graham Hughes. Yesterday, the UK government finally produced independent guidance on how students who are trans should be treated in our schools. This guidance was promised back in 2018 and only arrived now in the dying days of the Tory regime from the pulpit of depravity and sadism we've all come to know and hate. The hope was, with this guidance, that it would provide clarity for teachers on how to deal with situations in which a child is trans and is perhaps struggling with their new identity or is maybe afraid to tell their parents this is who they truly are. The bad news is that the guidance essentially recommends using incorrect pronouns, dead naming the student and snitching to the kid's parents about their new identity. No trans people were included in the formulation of the guidance. Look, I'll put this as straight as I can. If your child is trans or if your child is gay and they don't want to tell you, that's not a problem with them. That's a problem with you. Guidance in these matters for teachers should be a good thing, but of course we're living in a very different world now than we were just 10 short years ago. 10 years ago, transphobia wasn't rife. The best-selling author in the world wasn't spending her free time demonizing a vulnerable minority on Twitter. Crap actor Lawrence Loser Fox wasn't burning pride flags, turning them into swastikas. Groups of otherwise liberal women weren't travelling around the country to scream obscenities at a tiny proportion of the population for the crime of existing. If you had been in a coma for the last decade, you'd think that everyone had lost their freaking minds. Trans people, and especially trans kids, have it hard enough. In the US in 2022, 50% of trans and non-binary youth in the US considered suicide. If that was any other group of people, we on the left would be falling over ourselves to help them. But we're now in a situation in which people who see themselves as good people look at trans people as the enemy, souls that this world could do without. They don't fit neatly into your little box, so it's okay to throw them to the wolves. People talk about the trans debate. There's no debate to be had. Trans people exist and should be given our love and support just like any other minority group. The actions of a minority of that minority should not be used to tar the majority of that minority. In the same way that we stand up against racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, we should rail against the transphobia that has transfixed so many people in our nation, hardened hearts and torn lives apart. When I hear about demands for separate toilets for trans people, all I can think of is if those demands were for separate toilets for black people, using exactly the same arguments, the same twisted logic, people would quite rightly be mortified at the very idea. It is dangerous to assert that any category of people deserve a blanket presumption of innocence, said J.K. Rowling in October of last year. Which categories, Joanne? Black people? Jews? Muslims? I guess innocent until proven guilty is only a thing when you're talking about celebrity paedophiles and sex pests. But why is transphobia the last acceptable form of bigotry on the left? Because the evil but clever bastards in those mysteriously funded think tanks came up with a wizard wheeze to make even the cruelest and most vile transphobic bigot feel virtuous and good about themselves, make them feel like they're actually fighting the good fight. They simply conflated transphobia with feminism. The term TERF is often thrown around to describe trans-exclusionary radical feminists. Only that's an oxymoron. You can't be a feminist if you're transphobic. Feminists want to improve the lives of women all over the world, right? Transphobia makes the lives of women all over the world demonstrably worse, especially if you're a woman who doesn't look traditionally feminine. The anxiety of being harassed, questioned about your gender, and possibly being assaulted when you use a public bathroom is real. Anti-transgender hysteria in recent years has increased massively, and there are now bigots who feel empowered to take the law into their own hands and ruin the lives of any woman, trans or cisgender, who perhaps doesn't conform to modern Western beauty standards. Or let's talk about a boss who thinks a female employee isn't particularly good looking. She'd like him to use her preferred pronouns, but if the so-called TERFs had their way, he wouldn't have to. Oh, here he comes, he could sneer as the woman walks past within earshot. Give this to him over there, he could say to one of her colleagues, nodding at the woman, knowing she'll go home in tears. Or if a woman gets married or gets divorced and changes her surname, is it not society's duty to respect her wishes when it comes to something as fundamental as what her name is? Feminism was never about hating men, and it'll never be about hating transgender people either. That's just what the ghoulish gobshites who write for the Telegraph and the Mail want you to think. A small kindness which costs nothing, using the correct pronouns, can make all the difference. You might not know it, but it could be a matter of life and death. Just be civil, be polite, put people at ease. But this guidance says that teachers entrusted with guiding the formative years of the most vulnerable people in our society don't have to use preferred pronouns. They don't have to use the name the child wishes to be called. They can join the ranks of the school bullies if they want to. Now, the good news is that the vast majority of teachers won't. The vast majority of teachers are good and decent people. I just worry about those few that aren't. They say you never forget a good teacher. Yeah. Nor do you ever forgive a bad one. Of course, for our ghoulish Tory overlords, this guidance simply isn't cruel enough, with Kemi Bad Enoch and the sack of barbed wire and bile that is Cruella Braverman both whining in the press that this new guidance doesn't actually mandate the ritual humiliation of trans children in the way that these fucking monsters would like. Cruella would presumably prefer for any child who believes they are trans to be thrown into a camp and cured, as she either doesn't believe trans people exist or that they should be allowed to exist. Not that long ago, the state decreed that left-handed people were not a thing. Lefties were forced to write with the correct hand. Dyslexia simply didn't exist, nor did autism or ADHD. Kids were simply branded stupid or lazy. In the 80s and 90s, when I was in school, we weren't allowed to even discuss the idea of being gay or lesbian with our teachers. But for a while, we were getting better. We really were. Felt like each generation was becoming a little bit more progressive, more liberal, more forward-thinking, generous, kind, and loving than the one that came before. But then something went horribly wrong. The Tories, Tufton Street, and their toadies in the tabloid press have overseen a devastating drop in levels of empathy and common decency across our nation, as they repeatedly lie to the people that all their troubles in life are caused by the EU, Harry and Meghan, Muslims, refugees, trans people. But you know what the real problem is, don't you? The reason life isn't getting any better, why our economy hasn't grown in 16 years, why our life expectancy is decreasing, why wages are down, productivity is down, investment is down, why young people can't get on the housing ladder, and why people have given up all hope of living the life they wanted to live. It's the fault of one minority, and one minority alone, the Tory party. The toffs in high office who simply don't care about anyone but themselves. They are the rot at the core of British society. They are the root cause of all the evil they knowingly unleashed upon these shattered shores. And you might watch these videos and think to yourself, but I'm just one person. What can one person do in the face of such evil? I'll tell you what you can do. You can vote. And next year, you must vote. Preferably for Labour, but tactically if you must. And get these absolute monsters as far from the levers of power as humanly possible before they can do any more damage to the economy, the soul, the psyche of this fractious nation. A nation that in recent years has well and truly lost its way. Let me know what you think in the comments below, but please be aware, any transphobia will be reported to YouTube. There are plenty of places on the internet. If you want to, if all you want to do with your sad little life is to demonize a vulnerable minority, but that kind of performative cruelty is not welcome here.